how would you say you really differentiate between a founder versus something which could be like OpenAI just made an update and now your startup doesn't seem to exist anymore?
So here's a really simple test, which is, are you happy or sad when the models get better? And I think that if you're sad when the models get better because you've done some really sophisticated engineering work that leapfrogs you, that takes an existing model that has a sort of limit in a capability and you kind of build around those limits, because what typically happens is you do all this engineering work and then the next big model release comes out and it leapfrogs you.
Hi everyone, welcome back to my podcast. Today I'm super excited to sit down with Anish Acharya, who's a general partner here at A16Z, and I can't be more excited to pick his brain about everything AI, everything startups, and I'm sure he has a lot of insights around some really cool startups that he's working with. So he's gonna tell us about what startups are working on, what does this wave really lead us to in the near future, and what should you be looking out for.
Thanks for having me.
Anish, I think I should just get started with the most important thing, right? You've seen this entire wave moving from traditional SaaS to, at one point, data science as a service, and things just getting layering up one on top of the other. And now we are at a point where model as a service or like intelligence as a service is also a thing. Throughout all of this wave, what would you say is been something consistent? Even though there's like change in technology, there's change in cost and ownership and IP, everything is like layered across differently. But what would you say is a consistent underlying factor of what makes a successful startup 20 years ago and in the AI era?
Yeah, I mean, this is such an important time in the product cycle. So we've had all these product cycles over the years, as you mentioned, right? Of course, we had, PC, we had internet, we had mobile, we've had these small cycles like fintech and crypto, and now we've got the sort of mother of all cycles with machine intelligence. I think the thing that has been consistent through all those product cycles is that being more technical is a competitive advantage. And I think the first, call it 1, 3, 5 years of a product cycle, if you think of how the product cycles mature, it's like, think of the light bulb. When the light bulb was first invented, it's a really hard technology problem. It's like, how do you actually even invent and make a light bulb? How do we create artificial light? So the people who are most technical are the ones who have this competitive advantage because they're the only ones that know the kind of the secret recipe and have explored all the kind of technical edges to be able to create this important invention of the light bulb. And then after some years, the sort of knowledge of how to create the light bulb becomes diffused, and most engineers and technologists know how to make a light bulb. Then the leverage kind of moves from engineering and technology to product. It's like, well, what kind of light bulb do you want? How many watts do you want? Would you like a beautiful colored light bulb? So now technology is a commodity, product actually has leverage. Over time, product becomes a commodity, marketing has leverage, and that's how these product cycles tend to mature. So I think the thing that has been consistent over the last 3 years is that being more technology forward, more technology interested, building better technology intuition has advantaged you as a founder in the AI era. Something
that you mentioned is very important, which is technical skill set as a moat. But I feel with all the AI assisted coding, the build part is become really cheap.
Yeah.
It's become really fast and it's become really easy for people who have never touched code a day in their life.
That's right, yeah.
So I'm just thinking, if that build part the cycle of building can go from a year long to 2 weeks, or even like, hey, I built this overnight.
Yeah.
What are the things that startup founders should be focusing on to build a strong moat for themselves?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few questions in there, but number one, when I say being more technical, I'm not talking about syntax. I think we all agree knowing more syntax was never really a competitive advantage, but it certainly isn't today. I think a lot about technology intuition, which is a combination of sort of curiosity and depth of exploration. It's really important that technologists and engineers use all the different technologies and understand their shapes and their trade-offs. For example, for the last week, I've been obsessed with GLM 5.2. I don't know if you've used it, the new ZAI model. It's awesome. It's open weight, which has all of these crazy implications for the ecosystem. And if you use it, it's sort of got the competence of 5.5 with the personality of 4.8, which I know is a weird vibes thing to say, but if you use it, you can kind of feel it. So I think that is really important. I think the other thing that's important is just going deep on some of these personal projects or some of these professional projects so that you can kind of explore where the limit is. And these days it's very hard to find the limit. So I think as a technology founder and as a technologist, I certainly wouldn't be despondent and say, oh my God, I used to have this competitive advantage because only I knew how to program, and now essentially the whole world knows how to program. No, there's still a lot of sort of expressions of technical advantage that aren't about syntax and programming. As for moats, look, I think moats really matter, but I think a moat is something that you kind of discover and earn. I think it's very hard, just like coming up with a perfect product idea. I mean, you know this, you're building a company now. It's hard to just go into the lab. This is like a fantasy. You go to the lab, you're like, I'm going to come up with this idea, and then you think about it, and you go hiking maybe, and you have a conversation over a bottle of wine, and oh my God, voila, there's the idea, and it's the right idea, and you build $1 billion. Like, of course, that's not how it works, you know? You make all these terrible assumptions, and you don't know which ones are terrible and great, and you discover by execution and shipping and selling. And the same thing is true of moats. So I think you have to have a moat, but to begin to actually discover a moat, you've just got to start shipping something that people want. And the shape of failure I more often see is a perfect plan with a terrible starting point versus a perfect starting point with no like ability to develop a plan.
I absolutely love that. Like it all comes down to who's more resilient and who's able to get into the uncharted territories to figure out what that moat could be for them.
Totally. And look, there's some moats right now that are really not explored. Network effects, you know?
Yeah.
Network effect is the gold standard of all moats. It's still as good as ever. If you look at Instagram or TikTok or any of these products, their moat was never that it was so hard to build Insta, right? It's not self-driving cars. It's Instagram.
Yeah.
But they have this network effect. So like that is something that's just hiding in plain sight. Why are there not more consumer and AI founders broadly building network effects businesses, marketplace businesses? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that. And Anish, I'm sure like you're speaking with 100% of the founders today who are using AI in their product.
Yes.
It's either AI powered, AI assisted, AI, it has to have AI in there.
Yeah.
So how would you say you really differentiate between a founder who truly is building something which is going to stay long enough versus something which could be like, OpenAI just made an update and now your startup doesn't seem to exist anymore.
It doesn't seem to exist. So a few things. So here's a really simple test, which is, are you happy or sad when the models get better? And I think that if you're sad when the models get better because you've done some really sophisticated engineering work that leapfrogs you, that takes an existing model that has a sort of limit and a capability, and you kind of build around those limits, I think that's a very challenging place to sit in the ecosystem, because what typically happens is you do all this engineering work and then the next big model release comes out and it leapfrogs you. And now you not only have a sort of offering problem, but you also have this weird cultural problem in your company, because you're like, the thing that we worked on and slaved away at and we're very proud of is now irrelevant. It's very hard to just delete all the code and start over. So I think this question of happy or sad when the model gets better is a good litmus test. My more intellectual framing of this is, can you be a point of economic diffusion for model progress into an industry segment? You know, so if you look at an industry segment like credit unions, you know, they're not the most sophisticated technology buyer. They don't have huge engineering teams on staff or really even much of an IT team. So they actually need the help of industry and application layer companies to price, productize, package the intelligence primitive such that they can actually use it productively. You know, if you went to them 15 years ago and said, here's cloud, here's AWS. Yeah. Okay, now you have cloud, go build stuff. Like, of course, that's not sufficient. They need a lot of stuff on top of that primitive. So I think in the same way, most industries in the world are going to need the primitive to be delivered to them by application layer companies. And if you can be one of those companies, and if you can be a very direct proxy, i.e., model gets twice as good, customer gets twice as much value, you're in the very best position.
Yeah, that's the harness that you have to build with.
That's right. I mean, there's a harness in a specific, and then there's just broadly, how can you kind of be a harness for an industry segment?
Segment, yeah. I absolutely like that. And how would you say the trend has changed? Because you're speaking with so many startups who are trying to pitch themselves that, hey, help us like build greater and better. What would you say is like your litmus test to figure out that, hey, like these are the general patterns of the startups that we want to invest in versus not? And the second part of this question is, has this changed? Has this changed like comparing to 2015 versus 2026? How much of that checklist for you has changed?
That's a great question. I think that most of the things that we have looked for are evergreen, you know, who are founders who've got an irrational connection to the problem at hand, Because as you know, often building a startup is an irrational exercise. By the statistics, most fail, and your probably highest expected value of cash in the next 12 months is going back to Google. So it's a fundamentally irrational activity. So you need a fundamentally irrational connection to the problem at hand as a founder. Are they deeply technical? And I say technical in a broad way. You can be technical as a programmer, but you can also be technical in your knowledge of the history of financial services and all of the mistakes that have been made. And then 3, do they kind of have evidence that their assumptions are playing out? And I think that is the part where we hold people to a higher bar than we ever have had before. Because in the old days, if you look 30 years ago, you needed to buy servers to do anything. If you look 10 years ago, you needed to be technical or have a technical co-founder, and there was just a limit on how much one person could do or a small team could do. But now there's really no limit. Seeing a team that has no prototype, that isn't almost already shipping before they're even talking to us, is usually a red flag. And then the best teams of all are not only shipping a lot, they're sort of, I don't know if they're changing their mind, but they're refining their assumptions very, very rapidly, which is why for me it's really important to meet teams twice. You meet them once, it's a data point. You meet them twice, it's a trend. And I think we expect the kind of slope of the line to be sharper than ever.
That's very cool. And I feel like you have a very unique insight into what's going to be the next Cursor and what's going to be the next Facebook. And you know that, right?
Yeah.
Because you are so deep into the weeds of such early startups that I feel even the Googles and the OpenAI of the world who are building the foundational model, or AKA the highest intelligent model, is still the foundational layer. At the end of the day, businesses are the applications, businesses are what end users are going to be using, and you have the best insight into what that's going to look like. So do you want to spill some beans on where are you seeing this trend?
What are the good ideas and bad ideas?
What are some of the good ideas and bad ideas?
The tricky characteristic of the good ideas is they tend to look like bad ideas initially. As Chris Dixon famously said, and our job is to find the good ideas that sound like bad ideas instead of just the bad ideas that sound like bad ideas. And if you think of both Facebook and Cursor, those are two interesting ones you mentioned. Facebook was criticized over and over and over again. In fact, DST did $1 billion valuation round in Facebook many years ago. And there was so much ink spilled, as they say, on how the price made no sense. Facebook had no business model. They would never make money. They were serving broke college kids. It was criticized to the moon. And then they had an IPO that didn't go that well. And of course, they've proven themselves now to be a part of the Mag 7 and one of the most important companies in the world. So Facebook wasn't an obvious idea for a long time. And even when it was working, it was an obviously good business. Cursor, right up until the acquisition was announced, was constantly criticized as a wrapper. They're cooked Claude code, this, that. Yeah. So there's just been so much criticism of a lot of the best companies that I think the most important sort of attribute of a founder is willingness to be embarrassed. And I think, by the way, this is a little more true in consumer than enterprise, because at least in enterprise, you can explain to people what you do and what's the problem you're solving and why it's important. Consumer just sounds ridiculous. To your friends, your family, to your partner, even to yourself sometimes. It's very embarrassing until it works, and then it's the most obvious thing in the world, Snap was a sexting photo thing. Why would you ever want your photos to disappear? Yeah. That's ridiculous. They're so precious. Until it was like, of course we do disappearing photos. That's the most commodity feature idea in the world. So it's a funny emotional journey for founders. So I don't know what the next big idea is, but I do think the most interesting ones are the ones that are a little embarrassing to explore. Also think, by the way, as a young founder, this is a huge competitive advantage against big companies. Because what are big companies? They're made up of sort of managers and executives, and they have a track record of success. And that means that they're actually culturally restricted in the types of risks they can take. For example, companion products are so compelling. If you actually wanted to ship, let's say you had Gmail, but it had, an embedded companion who could talk to you and banter with you and maybe flirt with you. Imagine trying to ship that product at Google. Yeah. Maybe 1,000 committees and lawyers, and it absolutely would just never ship, and even more so at Apple. And yet as a startup, if you're like, hey, I'm going to build an inbox that flirts with you, it's like, okay, that sounds weird. It's a little embarrassing to explain to people, but if it's a good product idea, I just think it's harder for incumbents to replicate than you may think.
This is just my observation. I still feel a lot of the products that I use as a user.
Yes.
Again, if I just turn off my engineer lens and just look at that product as a user, more than the technical novelty. I feel I stick to a product just based on the user experience.
Yeah.
It's just like that trivial. And I feel that's one of the plays where I've seen some really top companies, like not taking names, are so piggybacking on the novelty, or like, hey, this is gonna make us look so smart, but they are missing out on the point of like, okay, but can a 20-year-old who has never coded a day in their life, can they use this? Can a 40-year-old use this product?
Yeah.
And that's what's important when it comes to a consumer product, because you are not building that product for the smartest people in the world. You are building that product for people in the world.
Yes. Yeah, and there's intelligence, but there's also agency.
Yeah.
You know, Sam and Elon are the two highest agency people in the world. Like, to them, the blinking cursor of what do you want is actually the optimal user interface, because they know exactly what they want. Every part of their lives are sort of prescribed by having a very clear idea of what they want. I think for the average person, they don't know what they want. And when you talk to someone like Eugenia, who founded Replica and Wabi, she'll tell you that most people want to spend time, not save time, which is it's a profound insight, and it's very true. You know, most people are sitting there saying, hey, what do I do with my extra time? And if you think about most consumer experiences that are very popular, they're lean back experiences. You know, your TikToks, your Insta, certainly gaming. They're not sort of lean in experiences where you're actively engaging. Yeah. So I think that you're right. Interfaces are super underexplored, and you know, if chat ends up being the kind of final interface, I'll eat my hat. You know, there's no way that's it.
No, that's a great insight. Anish, here's a question, and maybe like part of my personal interest as well. I am seeing that a lot of the times, startup used to be something which was coming out of universities. These young kids who have like high risk taking appetite are the ones who are coming out and like building companies and like taking that leap. But in the last 5 years, the number of people who are in their 40s and 50s wanting to take that leap has also increased.
Totally.
Probably because of cost of building is cheaper now, right? So for them to like continue their 9 to 5 and start building something on the side is not as daunting, or at least not as expensive.
Yeah.
So what would you say is the difference in mindset that people should have if they are building a startup in their early 20s versus somebody who's building their startup in like their late 40s?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, one, I would say that there's actually a long history of people in their 40s and 50s building great companies. So the WhatsApp founders are probably the best examples. You know, I think they were both over 40 or at least late 30s when they started WhatsApp. And if you think back to the kind of old history, you know, pre-YC, other than some counterexamples like Mark Andreessen, most of the companies were started by people who are experienced business people, because you had to trust them with a lot of money, you know, which was, of course, unsecured. And they had to buy servers, and they had to do all these things and have business plans and, you know how to throw a suit on. And so there actually has been, I'd say, history has perhaps favored people that have a little bit of experience over the very young college grads. Now, you know, between examples like Mark set with Netscape and, of course, Y Combinator, and now we're seeing even more extreme degree. We met this really capable team a couple of years ago where the founders are 19, 18, and 15. So we're seeing this generation of very young founders. You know, you'll meet them when they're 15 and they've already exited their first startup, and you're like, oh my God, what am I doing with my life? You know, so
I'm too late.
They're so impressive. But I think the other side of the barbell is really interesting as well, because you know, so much of startups is what we call earned secrets. You know, what is something that is a secret or a non-consensus insight that you know? And the way that you develop those non-consensus insights is by experience with the world, you know? And often it's in very obscure domains, and those can make the best companies. So I think the big competitive advantage you have in your 40s and 50s is you possess many of these secrets. Some seem small, but maybe the foundation for something big. I think your competitive advantage in your 20s is that you're willing to be embarrassed. You've got nothing to lose. So I think you end up building different styles of companies. But if I had to pick, I'd say, you know, I think that the 40 and 50-year-olds are maybe underhyped.
Underhyped, yeah.
Yes.
Makes me feel slightly better.
Good. Yes.
I had a parallel question to something that you were mentioning a little bit early on, which is around how startups are thinking about operationalizing their companies.
Yes.
And I have a personal insight question because I want to learn more about it.
Okay.
How much do you feel that companies themselves are AI native? What they're building for the customer is separate, but like how much do you think they are themselves AI native? And what do you think about the lean startup mindset? Like where do you feel that could be successful, and where do you feel that no, this is where you actually need humans?
Yeah.
And like you need to expand the team, and like you need to expand the headcount.
That's a good question. I can't imagine how you can build a very AI native product without being an AI native team. So, because all the intuition comes from using the tools.
Yeah.
So how can you know what to build if you don't use the tools? So I think, that's one and the same in my mind. I do think that there's more of a fat startup case for fat startups these days, because if you're training a model, pre-training a model, or even post-training a model, you need a lot of money. You need GPU capacity, and you need to pay these sort of experts who know the dark arts of model training. So I'd say there are more sort of, well-capitalized, heavily capitalized seed stage companies than we've ever seen before in history. And then as for when you need a human in the loop, I don't know. To me, it's some combination of shipping and selling. I think shipping, of course, coding agents are doing the execution, but knowing what to ship. And I think relationships are actually more important than ever. I think that any headcount you have that's not involved in shipping or selling, I wonder why you have it. I think it should be minimal to zero.
I love that.
Yeah.
Very tactical advice. Tactical advice. So Anish, you have a lot of context now. With all your years of experience, Anish today has way more context than the 20-year-old.
Some may have left my context window, but yes, I do have some, yes.
Let's assume that it's still sitting in your long-term memory.
Okay,
and you can fetch it whenever you
I'll
need
do a
it.
tool call if I need to, yes.
You can definitely do a tool call to find it. But if you were speaking with a 20-year-old Anish, like the old self, what would you tell him that, hey, buddy, this is what you need to watch out for?
I don't know about watch out for, but I'll tell you what I would do, which is actually the same thing that I tried to do, and I've been trying to do for my whole career, which is the number one most important thing is if you want to be at the edge of an industry and make the highest contribution, you have to be in the same place that all the other people with the same intention are. If you want to be in entertainment, you have to be in Los Angeles. If you want to start a hedge fund, don't start it in Denver. Start it in New York. And if you want to be in technology, you just have to be in the Bay Area. And I wish that wasn't true. And I think there's a lot of really cool businesses that get built outside of the Bay Area. But I just think it's a competitive advantage to be here, especially at a moment like this. So I'd say either come here or get as close as possible. For me, after graduating, the closest I could get was going to Amazon in 2003, which is far away from friends and family and everything I knew. It was not a high status tech job. They sold books and CDs online. My parents would sometimes tell people I worked at a bookstore, which was technically true, but ridiculous. But I made my way to the Bay Area, and I never left, and I never will leave. So that's one really important thing. And I think the second thing is just start shipping. Because the way you distinguish yourself in our community, as you know, is by shipping. Yeah. And that's the most special, magical thing about our community. Our whole community is this process of turning outsiders into insiders. And the way that it works is some combination of ambition and execution. Yeah. So it's actually a very clear path. You just have to be willing to live in SF and have not the tier 1 dating life, not the tier 1 sort of cultural life, not that, you're going to sacrifice everything else except doing the best work of your career and your life. And if you're up for that, then there's no other choice.
Yeah. I can't more strongly agree with you on that there is no better place to be in if you're remotely even interested in tech or AI than Bay Area.
Yes.
I feel a lot of times when I'm having this discussion with people who are in other cities, their argument is around the cost of living, and I'm like, you need to search up this term called opportunity cost, because the ceiling is just not there. It's so high that you can't even see the ceiling of what you can achieve in a place like Bay Area. And just being around people, there are I see founders, so Jimmy, I met Jimmy in New York because I had written a blog about Claude Shannon, and he just came across my blog.
Cool.
And he was like, hey, would love to meet and discuss what you're doing. And the kind of connections that I've made because of my network in Bay Area is just incredible. I wouldn't have even remotely thought of getting deep into the weeds of that network. And it's just the ceiling is so high you can't even see the ceiling in Bay Area. That's what I tell people.
I agree with that. And for all the people who are listening that can't be in the Bay Area for whatever reason, there's I won't and I can't. And for some people, you just can't. I was born in Canada, and the visa situation is very complicated, and I know that's true for a lot of people around the world. I think you actually can do more to immerse yourself in Silicon Valley culture than ever before. 20 years ago, There was a very small number of blogs, if any, because it was sort of considered a faux pas to write down what you knew and do marketing, as other VCs called it, until Mark and Ben changed the game. There's a small number of people like Chris Dixon and Naval that were writing a little bit about these things, but you really had to be here to know 90% of it. Yeah. And now if you're pretty intentional about X and you're willing to ship things in public and you're willing to sort of tune into a lot of the new media work that people like you are doing, you can actually pick up on a lot of the signal. So it's certainly not hopeless if you're not here, but I think if you can be here, it's a privilege to be here, like make it happen.
100%. I absolutely love that. So Anish, I just want to end with one last thing, which is all of us have a laundry list of items on what we predict is going to be the future, what the future is going to look like 10 years from now, based on whatever data points we have seen so far. It is a long shot in many ways, but I have a laundry list of items. I'm sure you have a laundry list of items. Just spill some of those things.
What the future is going to be like, I predict extreme technology and extreme humanity.
Okay, what does that mean?
Yeah, let me tell you what I mean by that. So I think that our technology time is going to be more productive, more intentional, and more, it's going to feel like Star Trek or Tron or something like that, where you're going to plug in and have 1,000 monitors and be doing 1,000 things and running 1,000 businesses. And, it's going to be, approaching infinitely levered, I think, and then you're going to detach from that and go outside and put your feet in the grass and chase your children around, and it's going to feel like a 1950s Norman Rockwell painting. So I think that, to me, that's the most exciting thing. I think this dramatic increase in productivity is going to show up through us being more satisfied and, of course, having higher impact in our intentional digital lives, and then being more unstructured and more fulfilled and more really sort of spiritually matured in our asynchronous, offline, family-oriented lives.
This is my favorite question to ask, because you mentioned there's going to be a lot more humanity and a lot more technology. Do you think there would be parts of our brains or parts of human intelligence which is going to cease to exist because of that increased technology adoption?
I don't think so. This argument has been made over and over again. Are the kids really thinking? There was a moral panic about the calculator. Yeah, I think a lot of it is actually a diffusion of specialized knowledge to generalists. If you think of the number of people who understood special relativity as a concept, right after Einstein wrote the paper, you could count it on one hand. And then over the last, almost 100 years, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of university students and professors and experts, of course, have come to understand special relativity, perhaps millions of people. There's a power in that diffusion, because now it becomes a tool, even if people are just conceptually familiar with it, that they can incorporate in other types of their thinking. So I think actually it's going to advance our intelligence. Now the shape of it may be a little bit more breadth and less people focused on the depth, but I don't think that either means that we lose the capability for depth, nor do I think it's a net negative on the surface area of our intelligence. Yeah.
I love to use the analogy of reinventing the wheel. Why would you reinvent the wheel? Because now you're building the Lamborghini on top of the wheel.
Yeah.
That if you still want to keep the skill of building the wheel, then you're just wasting that skill.
Yeah, and that's also the wheel to what end, actually. There's an interesting book that talks about the sort of history of various societies in different countries, and they talk about how in South America, because they didn't have animals that could be domesticated, the only wheels they had were on children's toys, because they couldn't have pack animals, right? So the wheel didn't have utility in society, and therefore it's what is the point of actually this invention? And it didn't get invented. So with a lot of these things, I kind of come back to that, which is I think there'll be more interest in it when it has more utility, and the way for these things to have more utility is for the knowledge of them to be more broadly dispersed, which language models are very good at. So I'm very actually optimistic about the kind of the breadth and depth of our collective intellectual surface.
Yeah, I absolutely love the thing that you ended with, which is the future is going to look lot more technology and a lot more humanity.
Yes.
I absolutely love that.
Well, let's build it together. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Anish.
It was a pleasure.